Hi, everyone. We're short one writer, but time is short, so let's get started. I'm Gabriel Sanders of Tablet Magazine, and I'd like to welcome you to our panel, Migration with Baggage, with the writers Amitava Kumar, Kim Thúy, and, with God's help, Nuruddin Farah. Let me introduce our panelists, at least the ones who are here so far. Born in Saigon in 1968, Kim Thúy left Vietnam with the boat people at the age of 10 and settled with her family in Quebec. She has worked as a seamstress, interpreter, lawyer, restaurant owner, and food commentator on radio and television. She lives now in Montreal and devotes herself to writing. Her first book, Rue, was a bestseller in Quebec and France and has been translated into more than 25 languages. To her left is Amitabha Kumar, who is a writer and journalist. He was born in Ara, India, and grew up in nearby Patna, famous for its corruption, crushing poverty, and delicious mangoes. He is the author of several works of nonfiction and 2 novels, most recently Immigrant, Montana, which Publishers Weekly described as consistently surprising and hilarious, an inventive delight. Kumar lives in Poughkeepsie in upstate New York and teaches at Vassar. I'll introduce Nuruddin too. So Nuruddin Farah was born in what is today Somalia, and then since leaving Somalia in the 70s, he has lived and taught in numerous countries, including the United States, England, Germany, Italy, Sweden, Sudan, India, Uganda, Nigeria, and South Africa. His latest novel, he's the author of some 12 novels, and his latest, North of Dawn, which will only be coming out in December, focuses on a family of Somali expats living in Norway whose quiet lives are upturned when their son, who has become a jihadist in Somalia, blows himself up, and his widow and her 2 children leave Somalia to live in Oslo. All right. To get things going, I was hoping to ask each of you in an open-ended way about the theme of this panel, migration and baggage. What is it that the migrant writer carries? The few objects that matter most? Is it a more metaphorical burden, the burden of history? Or is it something more ineffable still, namely the fuel necessary for the writer's task?
I think in the A, B, and C, we have the answer loaded in a particular way. What do you say?
Oh,
is it
I would
C?
say that.
It's not multiple choice.
Oh, okay, cool. Now I get it. Then A, B, C for me. But you go ahead.
You want a long answer or
well,
yeah,
we're down one
ABC?
panelist, so that does give you more time.
Okay. I was going to say we were lucky enough to have left Vietnam with nothing, with no luggage as such, physical luggage. And so in a way, it was a blessing because when we arrived in Canada after the 4 months in the refugee camp, we arrived in Canada with no luggage, right? No physical luggage. And so when you've lived in a refugee camp for 4 months, basically you have enough time to forget where you come from almost. So when you arrive in Canada, even though the mattress there is maybe not more comfortable or less comfortable than your mattress at home, you don't compare, you don't miss it, because in the refugee camp you don't have a mattress. So and then rice. When we first arrived in Quebec 40 years ago, there was not so much rice available. The only one available was minute rice, and we thought that it was uncooked rice. We couldn't eat it, and they served it on a plate with a fork, and we eat it, the other way. We push rice, and then so how do you eat uncooked rice from a fork. It kept falling off. But we were happy to eat rice because finally we had something to eat in comparison with the refugee camp. Whereas if we took a plane from our home, in Saigon and then left with luggage and arrived in Canada, I'm sure we would have missed the rice back home. Whereas in Quebec we were just happy. Oh, we're eating. That's it. So that I think we left. We were lucky to have left with no luggage in a way. But baggage, I think it's another level. But I'll continue after.
Sure. The post-colonial condition is marked by a certain idea of loss, or migrants. The idea of loss. So I'm feeling the absence of Nuruddin Farah even more keenly, because this is our life. That you are living in a room, but you always think there is one room that is missing, or one room that is unoccupied. So Nuruddin is doing his work even in his absence. He's making us aware of lack. So.
Well, I did just learn that he is unwell, and he won't be joining us.
Okay. All right. Wonderful writer. I had been put on another panel just before this, and I agreed to this madcap design because I wanted to share the panel with Nuruddin too. But it's great. We'll try to make the best out of it. Yes. With that little baggage that we have brought, let's do a good job. Two things I wanted to quickly say was on that question was, there is actually a scene in my novel where the teacher asks, what did you bring? Right? It's a graduate seminar, and they have read people like Saeed, and he asks, what did you bring? And everyone has to provide a list of the things they brought. And it is true that we often deal with this contradiction of people who have come with one suitcase, and yet it is a huge baggage. So that's a contradiction, because you carry a different weight. But the other thing is, which makes everything so light, I feel, especially in immigrant fiction and in immigrant lives, is that you discard so much and create your new identities. And I think that hasn't been described so much in our literature. The idea of how newness always comes into our world almost on a daily basis. One last thing I want to very quickly say is that over the past 15, 20 years, I certainly have tried to critique the baggage that we bring, in the sense that I've seen among diasporic Indians nostalgia, the soft emotion of nostalgia being turned into the hard emotion of fundamentalism, where from this enormous distance, either to assuage the guilt you feel from leaving your homeland or whatever, where you begin to promote, out of some misguided love, reactionary, hyper-nationalist causes. So that's the other thing I just want to close on,
I feel like a natural segue here would be to ask you to read, because we were talking about that very section, so on page 58.
So this is the section that Gabe pointed out I could read. I should say that at the last panel, as these gentlemen are aware, the moderator used the word sex so many times to introduce my novel that I thought he had not given enough attention to the highly boring, dull, academic matters that are also at the heart of the book, some of which is now going to be offered to you, because that's what Gabe chose for me to read. For this class, we had also read a recent magazine piece by Anton Shamas, a Palestinian writer who grew up in Israel. Ehsan wanted us to tell him whether the idea of a portable homeland, the things that migrants carry with them, appealed to us. I spoke up. I said that I had found very moving the story that Shamas had told of a Palestinian man bringing to San Francisco the small plants and seeds that were native to the West Bank, and hidden in his heavy coat the 7 representative birds of his homeland: the duri, the hasoon, the sununu, the shahrur, the bulbul, the suman, and the hudhud, small talk companion to King Solomon himself. Even the names of the different kinds of birds were charming. When I first read that list, I thought of the birds of my own past, one of the quail's song in the summer. Hassan was smiling. He raised the glass of wine in his hand. Kailash, Please tell us, when you left home recently and traveled to America, what did you bring with you? I was thinking of that question when reading Shamas. I carried in my suitcase a copy of the Illustrated Weekly of India with a photo essay on Bihar. The photos are in black and white. I recognize them as images from the place where I have my roots. The magazine with the pictures, Ehsan said. Yes, instead of what someone in an earlier time might have done, the earth from his native place in a jar, perhaps. He looked at the others. I brought pictures of my parents and my dog, Peter said. Others had probably done the same because they were nodding. When no one else offered a response, Ehsan said that Palestinians who left their homeland and were never able to return still keep the keys to the houses they had been forced to abandon. The keys are useless now because the locks are gone. But those keys are the portals to homeland. I had left home willingly, but was still struck by how little I had brought with me. It was as if I imagined I was going to discover a new self. I thought of my own room in the university apartment. The walls were bare. There was a window, but no pictures, and the room smelled of the cheap synthetic sheets I used. There was a lemon yellow electric blanket on the bed. Instead of my parents' photographs, I had carried in my suitcase a magazine, my certificates, my degrees, a fading diploma or two. I had brought with me a few music cassettes, brittle plastic cases, Geeta Dutt, C.H. Atma, Muhammad Rafi, Hemant Kumar. In my apartment, I read for class while lying in bed, music playing on my radio cassette player. For many years, often full of self-pity, I would think that Lata Mangeshkar was singing the anthem for people like me. Tum na jaane kis jahan mein kho gaye. Thank you.
I won't sing.
I didn't know. I was.
Anyone who can sing that song better should come and sing that right now.
It was with some apprehension that I asked you to do it, but I'm not disappointed.
You're very sweet. You're very sweet. Oh my God.
But I just want to bounce back on the newness. You know, when we arrive in a new country, we expect to see everything new. In our case, we didn't choose Quebec or Canada. We didn't know that we would have the chance to go to Canada, and we didn't know Quebec existed, so we couldn't choose it from the list or hope for it. But we got selected randomly. And when we arrived, it was at the end of spring, and the newness came with the snow. The luminosity of snow. You know, when you were not born in the snow, the light of it is very, very different from anything we knew. And we left a country at war, and then after that, a country in transition, and then we lived in a refugee camp. So everything was very dirty and very, how would I say it? Vietnam would be red during the war, and then dark during the transitional period. And then, that orange, rusty color of the camp. And then we arrived in the country where it was all white, like literally, you know, the plane landed. And I think if they wanted, they could have told us that we landed on Mars, and we would have believed them. And the newness was just overwhelming and amazing, actually.
There was something that really struck me in your book about that first taste of North America. You're in a place called Granby.
Yeah.
And you describe it as a kind of heaven on earth. And I mean, especially with the backdrop of today's refugees, many of whom don't have the good fortune of being refugees from communism, or at least a more politically palatable form of refugee. How does it feel today, in light of your very positive refugee experience,
I will tell you how we arrived, and then you will understand right away why, to me, Granby was heaven, and how it is still continuing. It's just that we don't hear about it. And so we landed, and we were shipped, not shipped, but I don't know, by bus. We were just transported to Granby, and we got out into this smaller city, 50,000 inhabitants, and the impression we had was that the whole city was there greeting us. And we got out, and we were so cold because we didn't have enough clothes on us, but the sensation was so new, because when your brain had never experienced the cold, you don't know how to interpret that sensation. And before we knew it, and to me, they were all giants, and they are still giants. I have not grown, so they're exactly the same size, and me too. And so it was like a forest of giants, right? So we stepped out, and then before I knew it, that was the first cultural shock. They took us in physically, and lifted me up, and that was so un-Asian in a way. We don't express our emotions so physically. And then the second surprise, or the second shock, was that we were disgusting, with infections everywhere, and lice in our hair, and diarrhea, and all of that. And they didn't hesitate, not even one split second, to hold us, physically, whereas we wouldn't even hold ourselves. We were so dirty. And then the third shock was that in the camp, of course, there was no electricity or running water, so there was no mirrors, right? So the first time that I saw myself again was in the eyes of these people, and they looked at us as if we were treasures falling from the sky. And I had never seen myself as beautiful as that moment, and I've never been as beautiful again because of the purity of that moment, how they were generous just to be generous. They were just welcoming us. And I think today is the same thing. There are so many people just helping out, helping somebody, read a sentence or fill out a form. But those things don't get to be tweeted. And that's why we think that they don't exist anymore. But that's the kind of help that refugees or new immigrants get, and that really that are really meaningful to us. And I still remember that man who helped us pick out a straw from the McDonald's. It was the first time that we could go to McDonald's, and we were so excited. We had been dreaming about a hamburger because we saw everybody eating it, and we had to save money. And my brothers and I, we were trying to take out that straw, and we couldn't, because we didn't know that you have to push on that little I don't know.
Lever.
Yeah. And this big head, all we saw was a very big hairy hand coming down and just push on that lever, and then the straw came out. We turned around and he just smiled. And I'm sure he doesn't remember that he helped us out. And his kindness really, changed us, but it did. And so these little gestures still exist. And we, the problem with technology is that we publicize only the bad stuff, the more scandalous or disturbing gestures, instead of all these little kindness of every day that turn us into great citizens, I think.
Well, one of the very interesting things about reading your two books side by side is that it contrasts the path of the voluntary migrant and the involuntary one. And Amitabha, I was wondering if you could talk about that, because Kim, you've said that what you practice is not an immigrant literature, but a refugee literature, and that these are very different things. And I think that's true, and that you might long for a homeland, but when Amitabha talks about home, it's tinged with a kind of guilt, that there is a family there that he chose to leave. So I was wondering if you could address this tension.
Yeah. At some point, Gabe, maybe we should also read, or maybe you could read at some point something from Nuruddin's book, if you have it. Yeah, if you had marked out a passage. But to answer your question, in another non-fiction book that I wrote, it's called A Matter of Rats. It's about my hometown in eastern India. And when the printer, when the publisher called me from India to say that they wanted a portrait of my town, the first thing I thought of was rats, because I said, I'll write about rats. And he said, why? I said, rats carried away my mother's dentures. And he thought that was outrageous. But then, as I thought about it, first I discovered that, rats, the police commissioner of my hometown had said that rats were drinking the confiscated liquor. And then my sister, who's a doctor, informed me that they had bought a machine which emitted a high-frequency sound, inaudible to human ears, but it would keep the rats away, because the nurses had complained they kept running over their feet. And I said, how's that machine working, after I started the book? And my sister said, well, the rats have chewed the cord. The reason I'm saying all this is because the real thing that was animating my approach to the rats was my feeling that I was a rat who had abandoned the sinking ship, who had abandoned his parents to be in, and they were getting old. And my book then became about my leaving my parents and what I feel when I go back every time, and the thought of the return. Cool? So, in my case, the voluntary journey to the voluntary return is marked by some sort of guilt. It is in no way comparable to the horrors of those who leave through some other kind of, under some kind of urgent necessity, forced to leave your home. And I don't simply mean those who are fleeing persecution. I mean even the working class Indian, who, I don't know how many of you know this, but some people started finding that the planes, as they neared the end of the runway in places like Bombay or Karachi or Delhi, when the jets neared the end of the runway and they made their slow turn, young men would dart out and climb up using the slowly rotating wheel to get into the chamber, which is then pulled up with the wheel as the flight takes off. And when the captain would unlock the chamber, bodies fall out near a parking lot or something outside Heathrow. Only one man from Delhi was found alive, because he climbed out having suffered a lot of oxygen deprivation on the way, hallucinating. So what I'm trying to say is the perils, the struggles of those who leave under other conditions is so much more stark. And also, by the way, has not found expression in the writing of Indian writers or other writers here from those parts, because the writers from those classes have not yet, it's only from what we used to call, back in my school days, the bourgeoisie, have the resources or the leisure or the education to write. Because very simply, till 1965, when the US became involved in competition with the USSR to send man on space and other things, the immigration laws were prohibitive, and when they changed in 65, they allowed only the educated folks to come here, so that there was an influx of doctors, engineers, scientists. Hence, of course, the present day epidemic of Indians who play doctors on US soaps and other dramas. And it is only in a much later phase of globalization, that the poor, the working class, who you see manning the gas stations, or you see undocumented coming through Mexico or Venezuela or San Salvador, those are the folks who have not yet found, in my opinion, their expression in literature. So my protagonist is hobbled by that knowledge, but he doesn't have much to say to illuminate the conditions of those folks.
There's a journalist at one point who asked me to write a text about refugees. Well, how I would define the word refugee. And I thought that I knew what a refugee was about, but when you start writing, then you wonder, what is really a refugee? And then, so I had, the best way is always to go back to the dictionary, to the beginning of the word. And I've discovered in the dictionary, in French anyway, I don't know how it is in English, but in French, the word refugee is found right under the word refuge. And refuge is a shelter which is temporary. so a shelter against danger yeah, but something very punctual. So because of that, I started going, oh, what is an immigrant then? So I went to look for the word immigrant. And the word immigrant in French is right under the word immeuble. And immeuble is a building, is something permanent, rooted, built. And immeuble is from the word immobile, that's how you say it, yeah? And so immigrant is someone who is rooted, or finally you can grow roots, basically. And that's the difference between the two, I think. When you're a refugee in a camp, I would tell you that it's a very special condition, because a refugee is someone who has basically left the past. You no longer own the past that you lived. Well, that's the difference between someone who chooses to leave a place. You know that you can go back, right? The Palestinian, they cannot go back basically to the house where that they don't have anymore. In our case, we never thought we would have the opportunity to go back to Vietnam. So the past was gone. And you cannot project yourself in the future, because you don't know when you leave that place, where you would go, and how, you cannot project yourself in the future. And the present itself is totally meaningless, in the sense that you don't know why you wake up. Mm-hmm. Do you wake up to go to work? You wake up to go to, to school? You wake up to go see friends? So the present tense is also, there's nothing,
right.
And that's
I think you're right about how when you don't have the language, then time essentially stops. When you don't have the ability to interact with your surroundings,
there's nothing. Well, why do you wake up? In a way, and so you only wake up and hoping that the rain would not go through. But these are the things that you can no longer have control. And as human beings, I think we always need to control or to know what is coming, and especially in North America, we love control, I think. And I'm saying this because in Vietnam, if you give an appointment, they would say, "Oh, I'll be there tomorrow." And I said, "Okay, when tomorrow?" And in the morning. Okay, what time in the morning? And I said, "Well, in the morning." And there's never a time, because if it rains, because they come by bicycle, then they would have to take shelter somewhere, right, before they arrive. So if it rains, then the time of the appointment would change, and it's okay. It's basically normal. So you have to let go of all the control. I had the opportunity to go back to Vietnam to work, and it was mind-blowing. I had become a North American, and going there and not having, the exact time. Like you said, you were panicking at 3 minutes after 2. And whereas in Vietnam, it would be, oh, it's fine, we're normal. And so I think that's the difference between an immigrant and a refugee. And as soon as we arrive in a place where we can project ourselves in the future, and that our present tense has a sense, then, you become an immigrant.
Could I ask you to read a little section? Actually, before you begin, I wanted to just say a word about how different these two books are. Amitava's book is playful and discursive. It's been called an autobiographical non-fiction novel, and it's replete with semi-scholarly footnotes and asides, and body elements too. Maybe we can still get to that. And Kim's is very different. It's impressionistic, it's lyrical, it's written in these very short vignettes that jump from Vietnam to Malaysia to Canada and back again. And so I just wanted
I thought it was funny. Oh, I'm so disappointed that you don't find me funny.
These aren't exhaustive descriptions.
Okay, so please bear with me, because I don't read so well, first of all, even in French. So in English it's even worse. And so I just learned from Gabriel how to say some words, and you see that I'll make some mistakes. So in any case, since our escape by boat, we learned how to travel very light. The gentleman seated next to my uncle in the hold had no luggage, not even a small bag with warm clothes like us. He had on everything he owned: swimming trunks, shorts, pants, t-shirt, shirt, and sweater. And the rest was in his orifices, yeah, diamonds, diamonds embedded in his molars, gold on his teeth, and American dollars stuffed in his anus, right? Anus, sorry. Because in French it's anus, and in English it's anus, and I always make the mistake between the two. I'm sorry. That's a new word that I learned how to say from Gabriel. Sorry, Gabriel. And you know, I learn words that way. Every word, I can tell you the story of the place where I learned it, and from whom, and the accent, and everything. So, sorry, Gabriel.
I'm tickled that I'll be remembered this way.
The educator of the anus.
Yes. No, but it's an important word.
It is.
Right? And because anus, it means year, no? No? No. Okay, there's no other meanings. Sorry, I'm learning a new word. So once we were at sea, we saw women open their sanitary napkins to take out the American dollars impeccably folded lengthwise in 3. As for me, I had an acrylic bracelet, pink like the gums of the dental plate it had been made from, filled with diamonds. My parents had also put diamonds in the collars of my brother's shirts. But we had no gold in our teeth because it was forbidden to touch the teeth of my mother's children. She often told us that teeth and hair are the roots, maybe even the fundamental source of a person. My mother wanted our teeth to be perfect. That's why even in a refugee camp, she was able to find a pair of dental pliers to pull out our loose baby teeth. She waved each extracted tooth in front of us under the blazing Malaysian sun. Those blood-stained teeth were proudly displayed against the backdrop of a fine sandy beach and a barbed wire fence. My mother told me it would be possible to enlarge my eyes and maybe even to fix my ears, which stuck out too much. She couldn't fix the other structural imperfections of my face, though, so at least I should have flawless teeth and, above all, not trade them for diamonds. She also knew that if our boat had been intercepted by Thai pirates, the gold teeth and those that were filled with diamonds would have been pulled out. My parents often remind my brothers and me that they won't have any money for us to inherit, but I think they've already passed on to us the wealth of their memories, allowing us to grasp the beauty of a flowering wisteria, the delicacy of a word, the power of wonder. Even more, they've given us feet for walking to our dreams to infinity, which may be enough baggage to continue our journey on our own. Otherwise, we would pointlessly clutter our path with possessions to transport, to insure, and to take care of.
Excellent.
So I have my luggage today because I'm taking the plane after.
A lot of baggage.
No, very light. This 10 days. She said this is enough for 10 days.
That's a tour for 10 days, and with high heels, just so you know.
Kim, there was something else that I wanted to ask you about. You say in your book, I mean, your book is a fictionalized version of your story, and in it, your protagonist talks about her name and how the name is just one diacritical mark different from her mother's. And so that your mother essentially imagined her daughter as a natural extension of herself, and how as exile this becomes impossible. And well, I was okay. If you want to discuss that,
go on. Did you want me to go on this, or you? Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, that in and of itself was an interesting idea, and so I was hoping that you could talk about it. The power to replicate, the parent's desire to replace his or herself, and how the experience of exile interrupts and derails that impulse.
The Vietnamese, I think many Asian countries would say that we are only what our ancestors had been. So if they were good people, we would have a good life. If they were bad people, we would have a bad destiny, right? So if you fail at something, you can just blame the ancestors, right? You don't have to bear your own failure. And even today, my parents' friends, when they come over, they would say, oh, you know, your book is doing well because your parents are good people, or your grandfather was a good person, or your grandmother was a good person, but never, congratulations. It doesn't really exist in Vietnamese. So so we and the only responsibility we have is to be good for the next generation, right? So that's why it's so important in a family, basically, to have, and in Vietnam, I think by question number 3, everybody knows who your father is and who your mother is, and you know the whole lineage, right, of your family tree. And so it's so important to have that link from one generation to the next. And the Vietnamese language, you see, it was written with characters like Chinese. We were a dialect of Chinese. But then it got alphabetized by a Spanish missionary in the 1600s. So now we are writing with ABC, right? But it's still a language based on ideas, on images, ideogram. That's how you say it. And because of that, it's monosyllabic. One syllable at a time. We never have more than one syllable. So the Vietnamese language has to be built basically vertically. You have different tones, whereas French or English is more horizontal, I find, because you just ask constitution, constitutionally, and you just add on, right? And so we go the other way. And so it's very easy for the Vietnamese language just to add a tone, to give to have a different word, a new word, right? And you know those. I'm sure you've heard it. La 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 la, and la is screaming. La is a leaf, and la is the verb to be. So it's very, very, very different with just one accent. So my mom, she loved herself so much that she, not only my last name and my middle name is hers, but also the first name with just that variation of an accent, so that people would see right away that I come from her and from my ancestors. And history has broken that, because in French, you don't, well, usually there are no accents at all. And so her name and my name are perfectly the same, or not the same. I don't know. Now we're confused.
So Amitava suggested that we read from Nuruddin.
We should. What do you guys think?
Well, I have a compromise.
Yes.
I feel funny about reading his own work, but there's another solution. So Nuruddin taught for a time in Stony Brook, which happens to be my hometown. And at the time, he befriended a Brooklyn writer named Richard Ellman, who isn't around anymore. But Richard wrote a book of literary memoirs right around the time of his death. And there's a section on Nuruddin, and it ties in with some of the themes that we've discussed. I'm just going to read a very tiny bit.
Please do.
This is Richard Ellman's name dropping. Okay, the chapter is just named Nuruddin Farah. Somewhere on the top shelf of the cedar closet in our house above the Sound, that's Long Island Sound, folded double so that it will fit, is the thick U.S. Navy pea jacket Nuruddin Farah wore as part of his mufti all the time he was in Stony Brook University a few years back. He asked us to keep it for him should he ever return in the wintertime to this part of the country. He asked us, though, also, he asked as though bestowing a privilege, as was sometimes the case with Nuruddin. Wear it if you like, he told me whimsically, but I think it will be much too snug for you.
Wow.
So I wanted to give a flavor of Nuruddin and of my old friend Richard. We have time for a couple of questions. Feel free to ask them.
I never had, well, I never thought I would be able to write because I don't master any of the 3 languages I kind of know. And so the book came to be just because I fell asleep a lot at red lights. And one way to stay awake, at first I tried many things, you know, to just write down the to-do list, and then after that I ran out of things to do. So I made a list of countries I knew, colors, verbs, all of that, and then I ran out of ideas for lists, and I started taking notes just to stay awake at red lights, because some red lights are really long in Quebec. Well, here too, I guess. And you know, when you fall asleep at red lights, your foot would get lighter on the brake would release itself, and the car would start moving on its own. And I had a couple of accidents that way. And so my husband said that the insurance company is no longer insuring us if I continue bumping into other cars. And that's how the book came to, well, that's how writing came to be. It was not intentional at all. And also because my husband, who is Canadian from Quebec, and he's a normal person. Well, you know, like a normal path. Well, he has a normal path from a normal family. You know, like a beautiful story. And so he asked me to just stay home for a month. No, didn't ask. I was on the penalty bench. He said, you're sitting down for 1 month and not do anything, and just find and dream of a dream career, because I kept on changing, and I didn't know where to start dreaming. So I cheated. I just put the notes that I had in the computer during that month, and every night that he came, he said, so what did you see today? And I said, I think I'll become a nurse, and then the next day a banker, but never an author. It never happened during those 30 days, but somehow there was another month, and then a friend of mine took it to a publisher, but I never thought that it was a book. When it was submitted, there was not even the title, or the pages were not numbered. It was just a text, and then it got accepted quickly, and then now, I don't know, I have been promoted to this new title as an author. That's it. But that was not intentional.
There's a question here. The question was posed very delicately and quietly. The question was, so in this trajectory of yours, which was so rife with change, what were the constants?
I would say that there was no constants. I became a different person, actually, as soon as we arrived in Malaysia, because I was born very weak. I was allergic to fish, seafood, eggs, milk, the wind, the cold, whatever, you know, everything. And in Vietnam, it was not so cold. Cold was 28 degrees, and I would swell up. But as soon as we arrived, after the 4 days on the boat, I lost all of the allergies. The first meal we got was sardines and rice, and somehow I ate it, and I didn't react to any of it. And then in the camp, we had fish 6 days out of 7. And so I became a different person, and I don't know what would kill me, you know? I think I'm condemned to immortality or something like that. But so I don't think there was continuity, but now I would say at 50, the continuity is more at the level of how I get to basically enrich one culture with the other. So I have both the Vietnamese and the Canadian culture in me, as if they were both mother tongues and motherlands and all of that. So that would be maybe not continuity, but the fusion of the two.
The question is, did your relationships with your family members also change?
Okay, I'll give you one example, and they're here, so I can talk about it. Of course, we were a big family, very closely knit, close knit, tight knit. But after the trip, we were 13 on the boat, and my uncle and my aunt were in their 20s with a 5-month-old baby. She's here as well. And we spent the 4 days together on that boat, and because it was so tight, I basically sat and slept on their legs because they were sitting one in front of the other with their legs in the middle so that all the children could be sat on them. It was so tight. And so just recently this summer, their son got married, and we were 40 in their house. And it's a big house, but 40 is still a lot. And people were sleeping everywhere, in the closet, in the hallway, on the carpet, in the bathtub maybe even. But in my case, I knew that their bed was the most comfortable one, right? So I went and slept with them. And I'm 50 years old. I shouldn't do that, right? But I forgot. To me, I was still their niece. And we have that proximity or that intimacy that probably we wouldn't have if we had not lived through that period. So for sure, there's an unconditional love or support among us that probably we wouldn't have at that level if we had not done that trip together.
That's beautiful. She's asking us to finish.
I know. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for coming.
And your patience.
I hope that you remember this panel for more than the word anus. And enjoy the rest of the day. There are books available outside. Please avail yourselves of them, and our authors, I'm sure, will be happy to sign.